Welcome to the channel Secrets of America. Today we're heading back to 1862, to the unbelievable story of two black twins who were labeled gifted after a series of tests left even seasoned observers completely without answers. But what truly made them famous wasn't just their ability, it was the impossible secret hidden behind those results, something that was never supposed to be recorded. This is a difficult, intense story, so take a breath and listen closely. Before we start, please subscribe and let me know in the comments which city and country you're listening from. Your support helps keep these stories remembered instead of buried. Let's begin. On the morning of September 14, 1862, in the small fishing village of Marblehead on the Massachusetts coast, two black children sat across from a white doctor who had traveled nearly 40 miles from Boston just to see them. The doctor's name was Nathaniel Warren. He was 53 years old and had spent his entire career studying the human mind at Harvard Medical School. He'd examined hundreds of patients, published papers in medical journals across America and Europe, and seen things most people would never believe. But he had never seen anything like the Carter twins. The children were 8 years old. Their names were Elijah and Ruth. They sat perfectly still in their wooden chairs, hands folded in their laps, their dark eyes watching the doctor with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. They didn't fidget. They didn't look away. They simply watched, as if they were the ones conducting the examination. Dr. Warren opened his leather bag and took out a series of cards. Each card held a different math problem. He had designed the cards himself, arranging them from easiest to hardest. The first cards had simple addition, the last ones contained calculations that most university professors would struggle to solve without pen and paper. He handed the first card to Elijah. "Tell me the answer," Dr. Warren said. Elijah glanced at it for maybe half a second. 23, he said. Correct. Dr. Warren handed him the second card. Elijah answered before the doctor's hand had even fully withdrawn. 57, correct again. Card after card, the problems grew more complex. Addition became subtraction, then multiplication, then division, then multi-step operations. Elijah never paused, never hesitated, never made a single mistake. When they reached the final card, a problem Dr. Warren himself had needed nearly 3 minutes to solve when he created it, Elijah looked at the numbers for about 2 seconds. 439, he said. Dr. Warren stared at the boy, checked his answer key, then checked it again. "That is correct," he whispered. Then he turned to Ruth and pulled out different materials, pages of text copied from books Dr. Warren had chosen specifically because they'd be unfamiliar to any child. One page came from a Latin medical textbook, another from a legal document full of archaic terms, a third from a philosophical treatise with vocabulary far beyond any 8-year-old's expected grasp. He handed the Latin text to Ruth. "Read this," he said. Ruth looked at the page. She didn't know Latin. She'd never studied it. She'd never even seen Latin before. But as she looked at the words, something happened. She began sounding them out, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. Her pronunciation wasn't perfect, but it was recognizable. Even more remarkably, after finishing each sentence aloud, she paused and offered a guess about its meaning based on the patterns she observed. Several guesses were correct. Dr. Warren sat back. His hands were trembling. In 30 years of practice, he'd never witnessed anything like this. He'd heard stories of extraordinary children, but always dismissed them as exaggerations or hoaxes. This was neither. He looked at the twins' mother, Sarah Carter, who stood in the corner watching with an expression that mixed pride with fear. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "how long have your children been able to do these things?" Sarah was 31, born free in Massachusetts, daughter of a black sailor and a Native American woman. She'd worked as a domestic servant most of her life, cleaning houses and washing clothes for white families who paid her barely enough to survive. She'd known her children were different since they were 3. That was when Elijah started counting everything he saw, adding and multiplying numbers from daily life, calculating some Sarah couldn't verify. That was when Ruth began memorizing entire books after hearing them read aloud just once, reciting passages word for word weeks or months later. Sarah had tried to hide their abilities. She understood, in a way no white person fully could, how dangerous it was for black children to appear too intelligent in America in 1862. The Civil War had started in April 1861, and 18 months later the fighting showed no sign of ending. Lincoln hadn't yet issued the Emancipation Proclamation. In the South, 4 million black people remained enslaved. In the North, free black people lived precariously, tolerated but not accepted, free but not equal. A black child who could read was dangerous. A black child who could outthink white adults was unthinkable. For 5 years Sarah kept the secret. She told her children again and again, never show what you can do, pretend to be ordinary, hide your gifts. But secrets escape. 3 weeks before Dr. Warren's visit, a white merchant named Thomas Aldrich came to deliver fabric Sarah had ordered for sewing. While she was in the back counting coins to pay him, the merchant noticed Elijah sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a discarded newspaper. "Can you even read that, boy?" he asked, dripping condescension. Elijah looked up. "Yes," he said. "And there's an error in the 3rd paragraph. The reporter wrote that Union forces captured 300 Confederates at Antietam. But if you calculate from the numbers earlier in the article, the real figure is 347. Thomas Aldrich stared. Then he picked up the paper, read the 3rd paragraph, did the math. The boy was right. The merchant left without another word, but within days the story spread through Marblehead. The black widow's children could read and calculate. Their minds seemed impossible to explain. Dr. Warren heard the story from a colleague who'd heard it from a patient who'd heard it from a neighbor. At first he dismissed it as rumor, but something nagged at him, something made him unable to let it go. So he made the journey to Marblehead. Now he sat across from 2 children who had just demonstrated abilities that challenged everything he knew. "Mrs. Carter," he said again, "I must know. How long have they been able to do this? And how is it possible?" Sarah looked at her children, then at the doctor. She knew whatever she said next would change their lives forever. "They've always been this way," she said. "Since before they could walk or talk. They see what others can't. They understand what others can't. I don't know why or how. I only know it's true." Dr. Warren nodded slowly, already composing the letter he'd write to his Harvard colleagues, already imagining the examinations, papers, and lectures to come. He didn't notice the fear in Sarah's eyes. He didn't understand that he was about to make her children visible in a world that punished black people for being seen. The news spread faster than Sarah feared. Within a week, 3 more doctors came to Marblehead. Within 2 weeks, a reporter from the Boston Evening Transcript arrived asking questions. Within a month, the story appeared in newspapers across New England. Headlines varied: "Remarkable Negro children display unusual mental faculties, cautiously admiring, scientific mystery, how can such minds exist in such bodies? Treating the twins as curiosities, nature's impossibility made manifest, calling them a freak anomaly." But the Liberator, the abolitionist paper published by William Lloyd Garrison, ran a front-page story, proof of human equality. That article changed everything. Garrison was one of the most famous abolitionists in America, and when he wrote about the Carter twins, people paid attention. Donations began arriving at Sarah's small house. Letters came from strangers wanting to help. Offers of free education came from schools and tutors. Invitations arrived from churches and lecture halls. But other things arrived too: threats in the mail, rocks through the windows at night, a dead cat on the doorstep with a note saying only, "Know your place." Neighbors who had been friendly now crossed the street. Customers who had hired her for sewing and laundry suddenly found other seamstresses. White families let her go one by one until she had no income. Sarah understood. Her children's intelligence had upset the natural order. White people had tolerated a black family among them only as long as that family remained inferior and dependent. The twins' abilities suggested the possibility of equality, and that was more threatening than any physical danger. It undermined slavery's justification, challenged society's structure, made white people question what they'd been taught since birth. So they tried to destroy what they couldn't understand. In November 1862, Sarah made a heartbreaking decision. She sent her children away. Dr. Warren had arranged for them to enroll at the Institute for Colored Youth in Philadelphia, a school founded in 1837 that provided advanced education to black students. Elijah and Ruth received full scholarships with room and board from a wealthy abolitionist family. Sarah couldn't go. She had no money for the journey, no way to support herself in Philadelphia, and she'd lose everything she'd built over the past decade. So she said goodbye at Marblehead Harbor on a cold November morning. She held them both against her chest and told them things she'd never said before. "You are special," she whispered, "not because of what you can do with your minds. You are special because you are my children, good, kind, strong, because you've survived in a world that didn't want you to survive." She pulled back, memorizing their faces. "The world will try to use you. White people will want to parade you before audiences, study you like animals, prove their theories about race using your minds as evidence. Don't let them. You are not evidence or specimens or proof of anything except your own existence. You are human beings. You deserve to be treated as such, and anyone who treats you as anything less doesn't deserve your cooperation." Elijah and Ruth boarded the ship, stood at the railing, and watched their mother grow smaller until she disappeared. They didn't cry. They had learned that crying changed nothing. They simply watched and remembered. The Institute for Colored Youth sat on Lombard Street in Philadelphia, a 3-story brick building that had once been a warehouse. When the twins arrived in December 1862, the school had about 120 students from ages 6 to 22. The principal, Ebenezer Bassett, 38 years old, a graduate of Connecticut State Normal School, one of the first black Americans with a college education, tested them differently. He didn't care about calculations or memory tricks. He cared about understanding. He sat with them in his office and asked questions about the world. "Why do you think there's a war happening?" Elijah and Ruth exchanged a glance. They had learned to communicate without speaking. Ruth answered first. "Because people believe things that aren't true. They believe some people are worth more than others. They believe skin color tells you something about the mind. They believe these things because believing makes it easier to do terrible things without guilt. The war is about slavery, but slavery is about belief. If people stopped believing black people were inferior, slavery couldn't exist. The war is really a war about what people believe." Mr. Bassett sat back. He'd never heard an 8-year-old speak with such clarity. "And you, Elijah?" "I think my sister is right," Elijah said. "But I also think the war is about money. Slave owners are rich because they don't pay for labor. If slavery ends, they lose their money. People will do almost anything to keep their money. The war won't end until one side has no money left to fight, and many, many people will die before that happens." Mr. Bassett nodded. These children didn't just have powerful minds, they had powerful understanding. But he also saw the danger. Their intelligence made them valuable to those who would use them and threatening to those who wanted to maintain the existing order. They would be sought after and hunted, celebrated and despised. So he decided to protect them, educate them, and teach them what no one else could: how to survive. The years at the Institute transformed Elijah and Ruth. They studied math with Octavius Cato, literature with Fanny Jackson, and many other subjects with some of the finest black educators of the generation. But more importantly, they learned to control their gifts. Mr. Bassett taught them that raw intelligence without wisdom could be dangerous. Your minds are like weapons, he told them. A weapon always visible invites attack. A weapon hidden can be used when the time is right. There will be moments to show what you can do and moments when showing it will only bring harm. Learn the difference. The twins practiced hiding in plain sight, giving answers that were correct but not too correct, displaying knowledge that was impressive but not threatening, reading white people's reactions and adjusting accordingly. It was exhausting, degrading, and necessary. Meanwhile, the war continued. In January 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and Philadelphia's black community celebrated in the streets. But the proclamation only freed slaves in rebellious states, not border states. It didn't grant citizenship or voting rights, and it didn't end the war. Fighting raged through 1863 and 1864, Gettysburg, Vicksburg, Chickamauga. Elijah followed it obsessively, collecting newspapers, mapping armies, calculating casualties, predicting outcomes with remarkable accuracy. In March 1864, at age 10, he wrote a letter to Colonel Robert Gould Shaw of the 54th Massachusetts Infantry, not knowing Shaw had been killed at Fort Wagner. The letter was returned, but someone read it, was impressed, and shared it. It argued that the Union would win by cutting Confederate supply lines, using black soldiers more extensively, and predicted the war would end in 1865. A Boston newspaper editor published it under the headline, "A Child's Wisdom on the War," noting it was written by a 10-year-old black boy at the Institute. Once again, the Carter twins were in the news, and trouble followed. In April 1864, 5 white men in expensive suits with Southern accents came to the Institute. They claimed to be Maryland businessmen who'd heard about the remarkable Negro children. Mr. Bassett met them at the door. He didn't like what he saw. They had the look of slave catchers. The children were born free in Massachusetts, he said. They're here legally under my protection. The leader smiled coldly. We just wish to meet them. Mr. Bassett stood firm. They are not available for visits. I don't believe your interest is academic. The men exchanged glances and left, but Mr. Bassett knew they'd return. That night he told Elijah and Ruth, they may try to take you. I'm sending you somewhere safe, a community near Oberlin, Ohio, a stronghold of abolitionists. 2 days later they boarded a train west, not knowing they wouldn't return for many years. They traveled with a woman named Harriet Tubman, not the famous one, but another Freedom Network worker using the same name for cover. For 4 days they went by train and wagon, staying in safe houses. On the 3rd night, Harriet told them bluntly, "You are being hunted, not just by those men, but by others who want to study you, display you, or destroy you. Some want to cut open your brains and measure your skulls. Others want to put you on stage like trained animals. And some want you dead because your existence threatens everything they believe. This is the world you live in. You must never stop running." The twins didn't sleep that night. They were 10 years old, already lived through more than most people do in a lifetime, and understood that their lives would never be easy. But they had each other. Their secret wasn't their intelligence, but their bond. As long as they had that, they would survive. Part 2, Oberlin, Ohio, was unlike anywhere they'd ever seen. Founded by Presbyterian ministers who believed in racial equality, it had welcomed black residents and students from the start. By 1864 it was the most racially integrated community in the United States. The twins were placed with the Langston family. John Mercer Langston was a black lawyer educated at Oberlin College. His wife Caroline ran a small school. For the first time since leaving Marblehead, the twins felt something close to safety. They enrolled in Oberlin's preparatory department, but within weeks their teachers saw they weren't ordinary students. They absorbed information at an impossible rate and made connections their teachers had never considered. The head of the department, Professor Mary Jane Patterson, the first black woman in American history to earn a bachelor's degree, called them in. "Your teachers are astonished. They've never encountered students like you. If you continue at this pace, you'll exhaust our curriculum in a year or two. I suggest we stop treating you as students and start treating you as colleagues." So they were given library access, invited to college lectures, and encouraged to conduct their own research. Elijah focused on math and military strategy, Ruth on languages and history, teaching herself Greek and Hebrew. But even in Oberlin, danger followed. In March 1865, a stranger arrived calling himself Dr. Samuel Morton, a scientist from Philadelphia. The real Dr. Morton had died in 1851. John Mercer Langston confronted the impostor, who sneered, "Those children are valuable. People will pay a great deal for minds like theirs, or pay to make sure such minds are never seen again. You can't protect them forever." He left, but the threat lingered. The Civil War ended in April 1865, followed 5 days later by Lincoln's assassination. Ruth understood immediately, Lincoln was the only thing protecting us. Without him, everything changes. The post-war years of Reconstruction brought both hope and horror, constitutional amendments granting citizenship and voting rights, but also the rise of the Klan and Jim Crow laws. In 1868, at age 14, the twins decided to use their gifts in service of their people. They moved to Washington, D.C., to work at Howard University, not as students, but as hidden researchers, contributing to papers and legal briefs that would be published under professors' names. As John Mercer Langston told them, this is how power works, not through public recognition, but through quiet influence. Before leaving Oberlin, they learned their mother was dying of consumption. Despite the danger, they traveled to Marblehead. On the train, 2 men watched them. At a small station, they bolted and were rescued by an old black woman named Patience, who hid them in her cellar. 2 days later, they reached Sarah's house. She was terribly thin, but she smiled. "You came. I knew you would." She lived 3 more days, telling them her life story and urging them, do not hide. Do not pretend. Stand tall. Show them what black people can become when given the chance. She died holding their hands. They buried her in an unmarked grave and promised, "We will not hide. We will fight with our minds. We will tear down their lies with truth." Back in Washington, the twins worked in the shadows for years. In 1871, Ruth wrote a legal brief arguing for federal protection of black voting rights, a brief that helped pass the Enforcement Acts. But a Southern journalist traced the arguments to Howard and discovered 2 black teenagers had been shaping federal policy. The resulting article, "Negro Children Control Congress," brought violent backlash, a congressional investigation, death threats, and attempted arson. But black newspapers celebrated them as heroes. The twins stepped into the light. In January 1873, they gave their first public speech at Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church in D.C. Ruth declared, "They told us we couldn't think. We are the proof they were wrong, not because we're special, but because we were given a chance. Every black child has the same potential. We must fight for opportunity." Elijah added, "Our mother told us not to hide." We will not be silent or invisible. We are Elijah and Ruth Carter. We are black. We are gifted. And we are just the beginning. The church erupted. Over the following decades, Elijah became an influential economist, Ruth a legal scholar whose work laid the groundwork for future civil rights arguments. They founded schools and newspapers. But Reconstruction ended in 1877. Jim Crow spread. The men who had hunted them never stopped. Yet they never quit fighting. In 1910, at the first NAACP conference, they gave their final speech together. Ruth, frail but clear, said, "The arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. The victory will come." Elijah said, "Now the work passes to you. Never accept the world as it is when it could be so much better. Nothing is impossible." Ruth died that spring, Elijah that autumn. They were buried side by side in Washington, D.C., with a simple headstone, *2 minds, one purpose. Freedom, *. Their story faded from popular memory, but their legacy lived on in every black child who received an education, every lawyer who argued for justice, every family that rose through hard work. The secret they carried wasn't a trick or an anomaly. It was hope, resilience, love, and that secret can never die. It lives on in every person who refuses to accept limits, in every child who dares to dream. The Carter twins lit a flame in 1862, and that flame still burns today.